In the cold hills of Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, there stands a rotting estate almost swallowed by ivy and time. Locals call it Hawthorne Hollow, but in the 1800s, it was known as the Whitlock Manor, the ancestral seat of one of the region's most influential families. The Whitlocks weren't just landowners. They were magistrates, clergy, bankers, and benefactors. Their name was etched into every church cornerstone, every courthouse ledger. But with power came secrets, dark ones, and over time, the whispers began about strange figures seen in the windows long after the family had perished, of chanting heard beneath the earth, and of a blood-soaked betrayal that cursed the family forever. It began with Lord Edward Whitlock, the third patriarch of the house, a man both feared and revered. He was known for his stern faith, delivering sermons at the private chapel on the estate with such force that even his own servants avoided his gaze. But those who knew him best said his piety was a mask, a brittle cover hiding the rot underneath, because behind closed doors, Edward conducted rites that bore no resemblance to Christianity. He was obsessed with bloodlines, purity, and spiritual control. It's believed he kept a hidden ledger, the Crimson Codex, a detailed journal cataloging not just births and deaths, but rituals tied to each child born into the Whitlock name. By 1843, the family had grown large. 5 sons, 3 daughters, and cousins who married into the line. But tragedy struck with a terrifying consistency. Children would disappear in their cribs. Heirs would go mad by 20. One cousin reportedly gouged out his own eyes, muttering about shadows in the cradle. Every death was quietly buried, literally and legally. No autopsies, no funerals, just silence and a growing weight that seemed to press down on the manor like a heavy shroud. One servant, a young girl named Catcher Mallory, tried to flee. She had witnessed something in the manor basement, something she would never describe. She only said that no child who cries in that house is ever crying alone. She was found dead 2 weeks later, her body floating in a reflecting pond behind the chapel, her mouth sewn shut with twine. By the 1850s, Edward's eldest son, Allaric, inherited the estate, but the madness had already taken root. He was rarely seen in daylight and spoke in tongues no one recognized. Neighbors claimed they saw him digging in the cemetery at night, speaking softly to graves, as if begging for forgiveness or something far worse. Allaric Whitlock's rule over the manor marked the beginning of what villagers came to call the sorrowed years. While Edward had hidden his darkness behind iron sermons and rigid control, Allaric let it seep through the walls. He dismissed nearly all the staff, boarding up windows and locking entire wings of the manor for reasons never explained. The once vibrant estate was now choked in silence. Ivy grew unchecked. Tapestries rotted on the walls, and strange symbols, carved with surgical precision, began appearing on the doors and ceilings. Only one maid remained. Her name was Beatrice Lowe, and she was bound to the family by a debt her father had owed Lord Edward. She once told a visiting doctor, "The house groans at night, not from wind or wood, but from memory." Beatrice had witnessed Allaric's descent firsthand. She said he never ate with utensils, only with his hands, that he often stood outside her bedroom door for hours in the dark, whispering in some forgotten dialect, and that once, just before dawn, she saw him carrying something wrapped in cloth down into the crypt. Something small, twitching, and making a sound that was not quite human. In 1856, the local priest Father Monroe was summoned to the manor. He'd been called under the pretense of offering counsel to a grieving man, but what he found was far worse. Allaric greeted him with blood on his collar, and eyes so sunken they looked painted onto his skull. The priest later wrote in his journal, an entry he never published, that Allaric kept journals bound in animal skin, one of which claimed the Whitlock line could only be cleansed by reversing betrayals of the blood. He never clarified what those betrayals were. That night, Monroe was locked inside the east wing. He claimed he heard footsteps circling his room for hours, but when he flung open the door, the hall was empty, except for a single rose lying on the floor, its petals soaked in something thick and dark. When he awoke the next morning, a sentence had been scrawled across his mirror in what he believed was dry blood. It read, "Confession is not forgiveness. Blood must answer blood." Terrified, Monroe fled and never returned. He tried to report what he had seen, but the Whitlocks were too powerful and the townsfolk too afraid. Meanwhile, Allaric grew more reclusive. He boarded up the chapel. No more masses were held. The graveyard was now hidden behind a wrought iron gate chained shut. And then, in the winter of 1857, a scream was heard from deep within the manor. Long, female, and cut short. When villagers rushed to investigate, the gates were sealed, the windows blackened. No one answered the bell. It would be weeks before anyone dared return, and what they found would silence the village for generations. When a small group of villagers finally gathered the courage to break through the rusted iron gates of Whitlock Manor, the air around the estate felt different, thicker, colder. Even the birds that once nested in the high chimneys were gone. As they crossed the overgrown courtyard, the house loomed above them like a tombstone, silent and staring. The front door was unlocked, but barely hanging on its hinges, as if something had tried to escape or force its way in. Inside, decay clung to every surface. The air reeked of mold and something far more sour, something that made their stomachs churn. Furniture was overturned. Portraits of the Whitlock ancestors had been slashed, eyes gouged out, faces disfigured. In the grand foyer, blood had been smeared across the marble tiles in a spiral shape. At the center of that spiral lay a single ring, an heirloom bearing the Whitlock crest, crusted in dried crimson. But it was what they found in the chapel that truly shattered them. Candles had burned down the blackened nubs around the altar. On the wall behind it, nailed to the wood, was a twisted effigy, part human bone, part animal, bound in fabric that looked suspiciously like altar cloth. And in front of the altar knelt Allaric Whitlock, eyes wide open, dead. His hands were pressed together in prayer, but fused with wax, as though melted there. His mouth was sewn shut with the same twine that had silenced Catcher Mallory years before. And on his forehead, branded into the skin, was a symbol no one recognized, 3 intersecting circles surrounded by runes. There was no sign of the woman whose scream had pierced the valley days earlier, but a trail of blood led from the chapel to the manor's crypt. When they pried open the stone doors, the air rushed out like a dying breath. The steps descended into a vault filled with Whitlock coffins, many far too small to be adult-sized. Most had been opened. Some were empty. Others had claw marks on the inside of the lids. In the farthest chamber, something was waiting. A mirror, tall, cracked, and framed in iron. Scrawled across its glass in dried blood were the words, "They never left. They're in the walls." The villagers never spoke of what they saw that day. They sealed the manor. Some left town entirely. Others turned to drink or prayer, or both. Over time, Hawthorne Hollow faded from memory. The Whitlock name was scrubbed from documents, from churches, even gravestones. But the manor remained. And decades later, in 1891, it would awaken again when a distant relative returned to claim the estate. His name was Dr. Elias Whitlock, a professor of ancient theology at Boston University. Quiet, bookish, and detached, Elias had always been a mystery to his colleagues. He never married, rarely attended faculty gatherings, and was known to spend weeks inside the restricted archives studying obscure religious texts and forgotten cult practices. When word reached him that he was the last living heir to the Whitlock estate, Elias didn't hesitate. Without a word to his peers, he vanished from a university and arrived in Westmoreland alone, dragging only 2 leather trunks filled with books, candles, and something wrapped tightly in oilcloth. When locals saw him for the first time, they were struck by how much he resembled the old portraits of Allaric. Same sunken eyes, same high cheekbones, and the same quiet intensity, as if the family's shadows had simply stepped forward through time. Elias reopened the manor despite warnings from the town council. He paid a team of stonemasons handsomely to unseal the crypt. When asked why, he only said, "The silence must be broken. The truth is buried too deep." Within days of his arrival, strange things began happening again. Lights flickered in homes nearest the estate. Dogs refused to approach the grounds, howling wildly at dusk. One night, a local boy vanished near the woods surrounding the manor, his body later found on the church steps, eyes open, a whisper of a smile frozen on his face. The priest claimed the boy's hands were covered in ash, and that clutched in one palm was a note that read, "The mirror remembers." Elias spent most of his time in the crypt, rarely emerging during daylight. He turned the manor's east wing into what appeared to be a study or a sanctuary. Candles burned constantly in the windows. Faint music, like an old organ, echoed through the trees. And sometimes on windless nights, villagers heard chanting, low, rhythmic, and in a language that no one recognized. Then one morning, the village awoke to find a letter nailed to the church door. It bore Elias's signature and one chilling line. The curse was never madness. It was penance. That same night, a fire was seen at the manor, brief but brilliant, lighting the hills like a warning flare. By the time villagers reached the estate, the front doors were wide open and the house, though untouched by flame, was colder than ever. Elias was gone. Only one thing remained, the mirror from the crypt, now standing upright in the manor's grand hall. But this time there was no writing, only a reflection. And in that reflection, not one person, but many figures long dead, staring back. In the weeks that followed Elias Whitlock's disappearance, the manor stood utterly silent, but never still. A pair of drifters who tried to sleep on the grounds were found the next morning outside the estate wall. Faces pale, eyes rolled back, unable to speak. One of them eventually muttered a single phrase over and over in a cracked, childlike voice. "She sings through floorboards." Local authorities attempted to declare the estate condemned, but each time they sent someone to inspect it, the report was never completed. The most chilling incident involved a county historian named Robert Keller, who had been researching the Whitlock bloodline for a publication on American noble families. Eager to uncover the truth, Keller gained permission to enter the manor and catalog its contents. He was a rational man, a skeptic who dismissed local stories as rural folklore steeped in guilt and religious hysteria. He entered the house on a Tuesday morning. By nightfall, he hadn't returned. When a search party entered the next day, they found his notebook sprawled open on the dining room table, the ink still damp, as if he'd just been there. Pages described in vivid detail the Whitlock family tree, hidden compartments behind bookshelves, and an entry cryptically titled The Blood Room. His last words written on the page were, "The painting moved. I heard it breathe. No body was ever recovered." Soon, the townspeople decided they'd had enough. The land was sold to a private developer, and plans were made to demolish the estate. But when the workers arrived, their tools reportedly rusted overnight. Machinery failed, and one foreman lost 3 fingers when a heavy beam snapped without warning, as if pushed by an unseen force. A decision was quietly made to abandon the project. No papers were signed. No refund was requested. Everyone simply walked away. By the early 1900s, the estate was swallowed by forests once again, the road leading to it fading into a winding path no longer marked on any map. But the mirror remained in that grand hall, untouched and still standing, its surface covered in a thin layer of dust, except for one perfect handprint in the center. Too small to be Elias's, too fresh to be from the past. And in 1914, just as the world began to tear itself apart in war, a train arrived in Westmoreland carrying a young woman named Allaric Whitlock, an orphan from New Orleans, claiming to be the last of the bloodline. She said she'd inherited a house, a name, and a mystery. She entered the manor alone, suitcase in hand. And 3 nights later, every clock in the village stopped at 3:33 a.m. The townspeople didn't speak of that night, not publicly. But journals and letters from that era suggest an overwhelming dread descended over Westmoreland the moment Allaric Whitlock set foot in the manor. Witnesses claim the stars vanished above the estate during those 3 days. The moon was visible everywhere else, but over Hawthorne Hollow, the sky was pitch black, as though the house had swallowed even the light. Allaric was no ordinary young woman. She'd been raised in the convents of Louisiana, orphaned during a flood, and adopted by a reclusive nun who, according to local legend, once belonged to a secret order within the church. The woman had taught Allaric ancient languages, Latin, Aramaic, something older still, and when the nun died, she left Allaric only one thing, a worn leather book wrapped in crimson cloth. On its first page, in faded ink, was written, You are not the end. You are the return. Adeline's arrival was quiet, unannounced, but word spread fast. Some said she was drawn by the inheritance. Others believed she had come to finish what Elias had started, or worse, to awaken it. The villagers watched the house obsessively, but she was never seen leaving it. Not once. Yet candles flickered in every window, and music, slow, sorrowful piano music, drifted to the trees late at night. Then came the bells. On the third night, just before the clock stopped, every bell in the old chapel rang out simultaneously. No one had touched them in decades. The sound echoed for miles, waking livestock, shaking windows, and sending flocks of birds into the sky in chaotic spirals. At exactly 3:33 a.m., every timepiece in town froze. Even watches that hadn't worked in years ticked forward to that moment, then stopped. Permanently. When a group of men gathered at dawn to approach the manor, they found the gates wide open and the door ajar, swaying in the wind. Inside, the house was immaculate, clean, as though decades of dust and rot had been erased overnight. But Adeline was nowhere to be found. Her suitcase lay open by the grand staircase, the crimson-wrapped book sitting neatly on top. But she had vanished. Only one clue remained. In the mirror, for the first time in generations, it reflected nothing. No room, no shadows, no figure, just darkness. But carved across its surface were the same words Father Monroe had once seen in the chapel decades earlier. Confession is not forgiveness. Blood must answer blood. And just beneath it, barely visible, scratched into the baseboard in fresh fingernail marks. She is not alone. For years after Adeline's disappearance, the manor once again fell into silence. But this time, it wasn't just abandonment. It felt sealed. People no longer dared speak the name Whitlock aloud, and children were warned never to follow the old paths through the woods. Even birds avoided the estate. It was as if something had finally closed itself off from the world, or worse, had finally taken root in it. In 1937, during a harsh winter, a traveling journalist named Vincent Harrow arrived in Westmoreland. He was documenting vanishing towns of the Appalachians, but when he asked about the manor, he was met with stiff silence or doors shut in his face. Intrigued by the fear it inspired, Harrow decided to investigate for himself. He brought with him a camera, a notebook, and a crude map he'd drawn based on whispers he overheard in the tavern. He entered the manor on December 12th. His last known journal entry read, "The mirror isn't just a mirror. It's an opening. Something watches and waits." What happened next is one of the most chilling events tied to the Whitlock legacy. On December 13th, at exactly 3:33 a.m., people across the village woke to a thunderous crack, a sound like stone breaking underwater. When they looked toward Hawthorne Hollow, they saw lights glowing from every window, but not steady candlelight. These were flashes, pulses, like lightning, but from inside the house. Then, just as quickly as it began, everything went dark. The next morning, searchers found Vincent's camera on the manor's front steps, lens shattered, but the film inside intact. The photos developed showed rooms that shouldn't exist, spiraling corridors, impossible architecture, doors inside of doors. One image showed the grand hall, but where the mirror should have stood, there was only a jagged hole. And peering out from it was a shape, human-like, but pale, eyeless, and smiling. The manor was declared cursed by local clergy. A perimeter was marked in salt and ash, and no one dared enter again. Trees grew taller and thicker, as if the earth itself was trying to hide the structure. Over time, even satellite images began to blur when capturing the area, an unexplained anomaly that technicians blamed on data corruption, though the shape of the estate could still be seen like a scar in the forest. But in 1971, nearly 40 years after Vincent Harrow vanished, a team of paranormal investigators broke the seal and entered the manor with equipment, cameras, and digital recorders. Only one made it out, and what she said terrified even the most hardened skeptics. Her name was Lila Brent, a former police psychic turned paranormal researcher who had spent a decade debunking supposed hauntings. She was known for her rational mind, calm demeanor, and cold resistance to theatrics. But when she stumbled out of the forest just before dawn, barefoot and bloodied, Her eyes were wide with a terror that hadn't dulled in over 30 years. She never gave a formal interview, never wrote a book, but in her final days at a psychiatric hospital outside Albany, she spoke to a night nurse in fragments. The nurse, a woman named Evelyn Rowe, kept a diary. In it, she recorded Lila's ramblings, some of which made no sense, others that left Evelyn sleepless. She said the house isn't haunted. Evelyn wrote, "It's alive. It knows your name before you speak it. It feeds on memory, regret, blood." She said the mirror was a heart, not a window, not a reflection, but a beating, living heart. Lila claimed that each person in her team of 6 had heard a different voice the moment they entered. One man heard his dead mother calling him from the floor above. Another heard children laughing behind the walls. A third, who had never believed in ghosts, saw himself hanging from the ceiling in every reflective surface. But it was what Lila found in the east wing that broke her. She said the rooms shifted while they moved, hallways rearranged, time stuttered, and in one room, a small nursery painted in faded blue, she found a rocking chair moving on its own. Inside it sat a porcelain doll with cracked glass eyes. When she picked it up, she found a note beneath the cushion, handwritten in red ink. It read, "I see you, Lila." None of her team were ever found. Not their bodies, not their equipment. Only a series of photos taken on a Polaroid she carried. Photos that had aged and decayed within hours. One showed a staircase with no end. Another showed the chapel, though it had burned down decades earlier. The last showed a mirror, but instead of Lila's reflection, there was a family gathered behind the glass. 8 figures, all smiling, all reaching forward. She swore the house called her by name, whispered her past regrets, offered her a place within its walls. If only she let go of her grief. She refused. She ran. And she never stopped hearing the voices after that. Before her death in 1986, her final words were whispered into the dark. "It's still waiting, and the bloodline isn't finished." By the early 2000s, the Whitlock Manor had become more myth than memory, a ghost story passed around campfires and forgotten blogs. Urban explorers occasionally ventured near, only to find the forest unnaturally thick, the paths swallowed up by roots and silence. GPS devices malfunctioned. Phones died. Some turned back after hearing footsteps behind them in the brush. Others never returned. But in 2009, a genealogist named Sarah Lennox uncovered a disturbing discovery while compiling bloodline data for a private ancestry firm in New York. While mapping obscure aristocratic families from the East Coast, she stumbled across the name Whitlock in an unlisted birth record from 1992. The child's name, Grace Adeline Lennox. Her own daughter. Sarah was stunned. Her daughter had been adopted as an infant from a now-defunct orphanage in Virginia. But the blood work didn't lie. Grace shared the same mitochondrial markers as Elias, Allaric, and Adeline Whitlock. Her lineage wasn't just tied to the family, it was direct, a surviving thread of the cursed line, somehow hidden in plain sight. Terrified, Sarah tried to suppress the results. She deleted files, quit her job, and began homeschooling Grace, trying to isolate her from any connection to the manor. But as Grace turned 17, strange behaviors began to emerge. She spoke in her sleep. Phrases Sarah couldn't understand, but which seemed to echo the whispers once described by Father Monroe. She began drawing circles within circles on the walls. She would stand for hours in front of the hallway mirror, not looking at her reflection, but just past it. And then one night, Grace vanished. No sign of forced entry. No packed bags. Just a single crimson cloth folded neatly on her bed. A week later, a postcard arrived at Sarah's door. It bore no return address, just an image of the decaying manor through a shroud of fog. On the back, in unmistakably Grace's handwriting, it read, "Don't come looking. I belong here." Sarah, now desperate, reached out to every journalist, historian, and occult expert she could find. Most ignored her. Some mocked her. But a retired professor from Miskatonic University in Massachusetts finally responded. He'd spent years cataloging cursed bloodlines and forbidden rituals across colonial America, and he knew of the Whitlocks. He warned Sarah not to follow, not to step foot on the property. not to call the house by name. It doesn't just want the bloodline, he told her. It wants the willing. And on the next full moon, Hawthorne Hollow's lights were seen flickering again for the first time in a generation. Despite every warning, Sarah couldn't stay away. A mother's instinct overpowered centuries of fear, myth, and reason. Armed with only a flashlight, a leather-bound copy of Grace's adoption file, and a silver crucifix from her childhood, she arrived at Hawthorne Hollow under a slate-colored sky just before midnight. The forest seemed to inhale her as she walked deeper. Trees leaned in unnaturally, their branches twisted like fingers trying to hold her back. With every step, the air grew colder, denser, as if the land itself remembered her bloodline and was awakening for her return. She reached the edge of the manor clearing and froze. The house was waiting. Candles burned in every window. The front door creaked open slowly, almost invitingly, revealing a hallway lit in flickering amber light. Sarah stepped inside, and the door shut behind her with a hollow finality. The air was thick with the scent of burning wax and earth. The interior looked untouched by time. Ornate woodwork, rotting velvet drapes, the cracked portraits of the Whitlocks all still hanging. At the end of the hallway stood the mirror. Tall, towering, clean. Sarah approached, breast shallow, and as she neared the glass, she felt it. Heat. A pulse. It was alive. But the reflection did not show her. It showed Grace, dressed in black, standing in the chapel, head bowed, hands clasped over the crimson codex. Surrounding her were shadowy figures, 8 of them, unmoving, faceless, cloaked in the flicker of candlelight. Then Grace lifted her head, and she spoke, not from her lips, but from the mirror itself. Blood answers blood. I didn't belong in your world, Mother. I belonged to theirs. You kept the truth from me, but the house never did. Sarah screamed, banging on the mirror, begging her to come back. But the glass rippled like water, her reflection fading entirely. The room began to shake. Paintings fell. Doors slammed. Whispers rose from the walls. Hundreds of voices murmuring her name, her sins, her grief. She turned to run, but found herself facing a corridor that hadn't been there before, one that led straight down. She descended without realizing it. Steps turned to stone, stone to bone. She found herself in a narrow chamber lined with mirrors, each reflecting a different scene, a different life. One showed Allaric, another Elias, and one, her own face as a child, crying. Then the final mirror called to her, not with a voice, but a feeling, a familiar maternal ache. It pulsed with warmth and sorrow. Her hands reached out on their own, and as she touched the glass that shattered, when Sarah awoke, the manor was gone. She found herself lying in a field of frostbitten grass beneath a pale dawn sky, her palms bleeding from dozens of tiny cuts. Around her, the forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no wind, just stillness. She rose shakily, her memories scrambled like fragments of a broken dream. The mirror, Grace, the whispers, the warmth, all of it felt distant, yet still pulsing beneath her skin. She wandered back into town, dazed, barefoot, and silent. The townsfolk stared as she passed, recognizing her, but unable to meet her eyes. She didn't speak for weeks. Doctors claimed she had suffered a breakdown, but she refused all medication, insisting what she saw was real. What truly disturbed those around her was what came next. Sarah was pregnant. She swore it was impossible. She hadn't been with anyone in years. Yet the child grew within her at an unnatural pace. Doctors were baffled. By the end of the 2nd month, she appeared full term. And on the 33rd night after her return, during a violent thunderstorm, Sarah gave birth alone in her home. The child didn't cry. It stared at her with wide, ancient eyes and smiled. Sarah named him Elijah, but from the start, he was different. He never spoke as a toddler, yet understood commands. Animals refused to be near him. Mirrors cracked when he walked by, and at night, Sarah often found him standing at the window, whispering in a voice far too deep for a child. She began recording his sleep talking, and one night captured a voice, clear, chilling, and not her son's. The blood has returned. The door is open. The Hollow breathes again. As Elijah turned 7, he began to draw compulsively, circles within circles. The Whitlock crest, the manor, and always the mirror. One night, Sarah found him carving something into the floorboards of his room, using a nail. She screamed when she saw it. It was her name, crossed out, and beneath it, "You don't belong here anymore." That same night, she vanished as if swallowed by the house itself. No sign of struggle, no note, just her crucifix left on Elijah's pillow and the mirror in the hallway, cracked down the center, one half reflecting Elijah's empty bed, the other nothing at all. Elijah was taken in by a foster family. They knew nothing of the Whitlocks, nothing of Grace, or Sarah, or the Hollow, but within weeks, their house began to change. One mirror at a time. The family that took in Elijah was the Rowans, a quiet couple who lived in a restored farmhouse just outside the border of what was once Hawthorne Hollow. Kind-hearted and childless, they believed the boys simply needed stability, warmth, and time. At first, things seemed normal. Elijah was polite. He smiled often. He drew less, spoke more. But even then, something felt off. Mrs. Rowan began waking in the middle of the night to find Elijah standing at the end of their bed, staring, silent. When asked what he was doing, he simply said, "Listening." Mr. Rowan dismissed it as sleepwalking, but soon after, the mirrors in the house began to fog inexplicably, thick condensation, even on dry days. Sometimes handprints would appear on them, small, pale, pressed from the inside. Then came the dreams. Both Rowans began having the same nightmare. They were in a long hallway, lined with flickering candles. At the end stood a woman in a black veil, cradling a child. She never moved. She just stood in silence, her presence unbearable, as if the air itself twisted around her. And every time they woke, Elijah would be sitting at the foot of their bed, humming an old lullaby no one could place. The house itself grew colder. Mold bloomed in impossible shapes, circles within circles, in corners where light didn't reach. And then the animals started disappearing. Their dog was the first, gone without a trace. Then the neighbor's cat. Then birds. Silence crept across the property like a blanket. On Elijah's 8th birthday, the Rowans threw him a small party, just the 3 of them. As he blew out the candles, every mirror in the house shattered at once. No explosion, no sound, just cracks, like veins of lightning, spiderwebbing through every reflective surface. And in each shard that remained, Mrs. Rowan later swore she saw not a reflection, but Sarah's face. Eyes wide, mouth sewn shut. They called a priest. He never made it inside. The moment he set foot on the porch, he collapsed. His heart stopped cold. No medical condition. No warning. Just fear, they said. A fear so ancient and deep it rewrote his body in an instant. That night, Elijah disappeared, vanished from his bed, without a trace. But the next morning, carved into the living room wall, were words neither Rowan had ever spoken, in handwriting neither recognized. It ends where it began. The mirror calls. The blood returns. And as the authorities arrived and helicopters circled overhead, the old maps were pulled from archives, tracing the edge of the forest once more, and in the thick of trees where no house had stood for over 50 years, stood the Whitlock Manor once again. Lights on, door open, mirror waiting. By the time federal agents and paranormal researchers arrived, the Whitlock Manor had reemerged like a wound reopened, identical in structure, age, and decay to the descriptions from nearly a century prior. Yet, no foundation had been poured, no building materials transported. It was as if the house had simply grown back. Elijah was nowhere to be found. The interior was preserved in eerie perfection, dustless, warm, and humming faintly with a low frequency no equipment could properly register. Recordings captured nothing but static. Cameras malfunctioned. And those who entered the house claimed time shifted within. Some were inside for hours, yet their watches recorded only minutes. Others swore they heard familiar voices calling them by name, dead relatives, lost lovers, even their childhood selves. One agent, sent in with a thermal scanner, never returned. His radio buzzed for hours with a single repeated phrase in his own voice. "We never left. We just forgot." In the grand hall, the mirror stood pristine once again, taller than ever, its surface shimmering like water in a breeze. It no longer reflected the room, but rather a night sky filled with stars, constellations that didn't match anything on Earth. And in the center, suspended in that impossible reflection, was a child, curled, eyes closed, breathing. Elijah. His heart rate could be heard through the glass, like a metronome syncing with those who gazed too long. Some fell into trance-like states, mumbling archaic phrases in dead languages. Others broke down in tears, unable to explain the grief that washed over them. The house refused demolition. Attempts to burn it down failed. The flames would flicker, stall, and vanish like smoke and wind. Explosives placed around the structure misfired. Even GPS and satellite imagery began glitching, with the manor appearing in different locations across the map as if in constant flux. A final decision was made to quarantine the area. A black site was constructed around the estate under the guise of a geological anomaly. But still people came, drawn by dreams, by bloodlines, by whispers in their walls. And each time someone entered and failed to return, the mirror grew warmer. And now, in the present day, over a century since Allaric Whitlock knelt in that cursed chapel, stories still surface of a figure walking the halls, of children singing lullabies that don't exist, of reflections that don't match the present moment, and of a boy, forever 8, standing behind the glass, smiling. Years passed. The world moved on. The forest swallowed more of Westmoreland. Roads faded into root and soil. New generations grew up never knowing the name Whitlock, but still dreaming of the manor. Children woke screaming, speaking in voices not their own. Artists painted houses they'd never seen. Writers penned stories they insisted were fiction, until they described rooms, symbols, even family names identical to records locked away in sealed vaults. And then, in 2022, something changed. A viral live stream from an anonymous urban explorer surfaced online. Grainy, chaotic footage of someone stumbling upon an overgrown trail deep in the Appalachian wilderness. The voice on camera was shaky, nervous, but persistent. "Guys, I think I found it. I think it's real." The stream went dark after 27 minutes. But in those short moments, the internet exploded, because behind the explorer, clear as day, stood the Whitlock Manor, restored, lit from within. And as he entered, viewers caught a glimpse of something impossible, etched into the glass of a large, towering mirror in the main hall, a live reflection of the chat, messages appearing in the mirror before they were even typed. One viewer wrote, "Show us Elijah," and the camera panned back just in time to catch a flash, an image of the boy, older now, or younger. No one could tell, but his eyes had changed, deeper, wiser, and not entirely human. The stream ended abruptly when the screen filled with static, but it had already been downloaded, dissected, and shared across every platform. Forums erupted with theories: time loop, interdimensional house, a bloodline trap. But the comments that disturbed people most came from old accounts long inactive, suddenly posting cryptic messages under the video. One simply said, "You see it now, but it's already seen you." Another read, "Bloodlines don't die. They evolve." Since that night, visitors to nearby would report hearing laughter echoing at night. Not childish, not mocking, just waiting. Wildlife avoid the area entirely. And satellite images once again show a dark blot in the trees, shifting slightly each week, as though the manor moves when no one watches. And those who claim to walk near the house, those few who dared, say the mirror has changed. It now shows you your past, your deepest regrets, your worst sins. And for some, it shows a door open behind them when no one is there. It's now whispered among fringe researchers and occult historians that the Whitlock Manor isn't merely a cursed estate, but a vessel, a living archive of every soul tethered to its blood-soaked soil, every confession unspoken, every betrayal unreconciled. The manor doesn't trap you. It reflects you until you're no longer separate from it. In 2024, An encrypted file was leaked from an underground paranormal research group known only as the 13th Veil. The file contained partial transcripts from interviews with individuals who claimed to have dreamt of the manor without ever hearing of it before. Every subject came from different corners of the world: Scotland, Brazil, Korea, Egypt, but each recalled the same hallway, the same mirror, the same phrase whispered into their ears as they stood frozen before the glass. The house remembers you. Researchers theorized that the Whitlock bloodline wasn't just genetic, it was spiritual, that the manor had long evolved beyond a single family name, now attaching itself to grief, loss, and guilt across generations and continents. You didn't need to be born of Whitlock blood to be claimed. You only needed to feel the weight of something unresolved. And those marked by the house began to disappear in small but increasing numbers. Writers, painters, historians, night shift workers, children with imaginary friends who stood only in mirrors. Most were dismissed as runaways or suicides, but a pattern emerged. They all had one object in common: a mirror, often antique, often cracked, sometimes a family heirloom that no one remembered acquiring. In each case, neighbors or loved ones reported strange behavior in the days before: quiet talk in empty rooms, standing motionless at reflective surfaces for hours, refusing to sleep near glass. In the final recorded instance before the file abruptly ended, a father in Ohio placed a baby monitor in his daughter's room after she began screaming nightly. He heard her whispering to someone at 3:33 a.m., begging them to go away. When he rushed in, she was asleep, peaceful. But every photo taken of her room that night showed the same anomaly: a tall figure in the mirror, smiling, in every frame. And on the edge of the glass, just barely visible in the reflection's corner, were the words, "Blood answers blood." The father sold the house, left the country, but the mirror followed him, shattered in shipment, only to reappear whole in the corner of his new home. The final known record of the Whitlock Manor came not from a haunting, but from a scientific anomaly. In late 2025, a group of quantum physicists at a university in Colorado published a private study, later censored and removed, on what they called mirror-based temporal interference. They had been experimenting with high-frequency resonance imaging when they began detecting irregularities tied to antique mirrors sourced from across the eastern United States. One mirror, in particular, retrieved from a black site warehouse in West Virginia, displayed what they called inverted entropy. The mirror emitted heat rather than reflecting it. Time around it slowed by measurable microseconds. More disturbing still, its surface showed reflections of places that didn't exist: rooms with 18th century furnishings, flickering candlelight, and on rare occasion people. One test was conducted with a sealed room, lit only by a single mirror placed on the far wall. A live feed camera recorded 72 continuous hours. For the first 48, nothing unusual occurred. But on the 49th hour, the camera captured movement, not in the room itself, but within the mirror. A boy, dressed in black, his eyes completely white, his lips mouthing a phrase on repeat. No sound came through, but researchers enhanced the footage and identified the pattern. You open the gate. You open the gate. You open the gate. Afterward, equipment began malfunctioning. Data scrambled. Employees reported nightmares. One technician took his own life, carving the Whitlock crest into his arm before his death. The university shut down the project within 48 hours, and the mirror was moved to an undisclosed location, rumored to be inside a Vatican-controlled vault beneath the Appalachian Ridge. But the sightings haven't stopped. In homes with no history of trauma, children still draw the manor. Elderly patients in dementia wards whisper the Whitlock name despite no prior connection. And scattered across the dark corners of the internet, forums too obscure for casual users, stories still appear. A woman in Oregon found an old, ornate mirror in an antique shop. When she looked into it, she saw a staircase behind her that didn't exist. A man in Italy woke to find his bathroom mirror filled with fog, and the words written into it: "Your regret feeds us." And most chilling of all, a live stream on a forgotten platform, running now for over 333 hours straight, showing a static, grainy view of Grand Hallway. The candles never burn out. The mirror always glows. And sometimes, if you watch long enough, you'll see someone step into frame. Not from outside the mirror, from within. The live stream was dismissed at first, assumed to be a hoax, an art project, some ARG designed to bait attention. But as hours turned to days and days into weeks, viewers began noticing something that couldn't be explained. The architecture shown in the stream shifted subtly over time. One night, there were 6 candle holders on the wall. The next night, 5. The rug patterns changed. A painting of a veiled woman appeared, then vanished the following evening. But the mirror remained. At the exact same time each night, 3:33 a.m., a figure would appear. Not the same figure every time. Sometimes it was a man, draped in colonial garb, eyes gouged out. Other nights, it was a child with a stitched mouth, standing perfectly still. And on rare nights, it was you, or rather, a twisted version, wearing your clothes, your face, but with eyes that didn't blink and a smile that didn't belong. Viewers started reporting sleep paralysis, blackouts, electronic interference. Some even claimed that after watching the stream for too long, their own mirrors at home would flicker just for a moment, enough to catch something standing behind them. The subreddit tracking the stream grew rapidly, filled with users posting screenshots of odd frames. One image, time-stamped at 3 hours, 33 minutes, and 13 seconds, showed something new. Etched into the floor, just in front of the mirror, was a phrase in Latin, sanguis vocat, ostum apertum est. The blood calls. The gate is open. Then came the disappearances. A user known only as Hexglass, one of the stream's earliest and most active followers, uploaded a cryptic video. In it, they walked through their apartment, pointing out strange cold spots, lights flickering, and most disturbingly, a mirror in the hallway that hadn't been there before. Their final words on camera: "I didn't buy this. I didn't hang this. I don't even remember this wall." The video ended with a scream. Their account was deleted, their phone number disconnected. Police found the apartment untouched, but the hallway where the mirror once hung no longer existed. Just a smooth stretch of wall, as if the entrance itself had been absorbed. And then the live stream changed. It began showing 2 views, one of the manor's hallway and the other a dark room with a single chair. Empty at first, then slowly, night after night, figures began to appear in the chair, recognizable ones, people who had watched the stream, people who never logged off, people who had been seen. It started as a family curse, a whisper in a chapel, a bloodline rooted in betrayal. But now, it had grown far beyond the Whitlocks, beyond the house, beyond even history. The mirror didn't care who you were anymore. You didn't need to be tied to Allaric or Adeline. You didn't need to speak Latin or bleed into the soil of Hawthorne Hollow. You only needed one thing, a secret you buried too deep, one you've tried to forget, one that festers in silence, one that the mirror sees without your permission. By the time authorities shut down the live stream permanently, over 11,000 users had reported sightings, episodes, or dreams linked to the manor. Online forums collapsed. A wave of disappearances swept through 7 countries, always preceded by one final message typed, scribbled, or spoken aloud. "It's calling me home." To this day, no official record of the Whitlock estate exists. No floor plans, no legal ownership, no deeds, only stories, rumors, and reflections. People still find the manor in paintings they don't remember buying, in childhood sketches hidden in attic boxes, in the distorted glass of hotel hallways, and somewhere, perhaps in the woods of Westmoreland, perhaps much closer, it still stands. The candles never go out. The mirror still glows. And the boy still waits, neither child nor ghost, but something between, something patient, something ancient. And if one night you catch a flicker of movement in your mirror, something that wasn't there the moment before, you'll know it's already begun. The blood remembers. And the house is never truly empty.